You're on Senate Intel Committee, and you've recently penned an op-ed in the New York Times. You said many of our serious problems that we face originated in our economic relationship with China. How far back does this begin in your mind, and how do we fix it?
You know, I think there was a consensus in this country, and frankly, a lot of us, myself included, were either agnostic about it or may have believed in some of the arguments that somehow policymakers concluded that once China got rich and got prosperous, that they would become like us. So it was okay to let them cheat. It was okay to let them do things we wouldn't allow any other country to do, because once they got richer, they would care about the rules and they would actually comply. And that turned out not to be the case.
Would you say that China's been deceitful throughout this coronavirus crisis?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, but that's the nature of a totalitarian regime. The Chinese government, first of all, probably didn't even know the full extent of this early on, and then when they found out, tried to cover it up and prevent the rest of the world from knowing it. I think that deceit extends to today, even now. We don't have clear insight into this.
In mid-February, you introduced a bill having to do with drugs. It was a bipartisan bill in an effort to try to bring some of the production home, to encourage some of the production of the components of so many important medications back into the United States from I assume places like China. What's the status of that bill?
Well, I hope it'll pass now, and I think we're going to have to take a broader look at supply chains writ large. But let me say about that, what people have to understand, and I hope people are starting to understand, is the medicines that we rely on. For example, generics are a huge part of what Americans use today for high blood pressure and all sorts of chronic conditions. The active ingredients in those medicines come from China, from India, a lot of it from China, about 80% of it. We don't really know a lot. And if they ever decide to cut us off, we're in big trouble.
It's bipartisan. Congress and the House and Senate can move fast. We've seen that with the 2.7 combined stimulus bills. So why is that bill not passed yet? What's the holdup?
Number one is obviously the what we're going to do to recover economically. That's the first part. Number two is what we're going to do to continue to deal with the pandemic from a healthcare side. And the third is what we're going to do to deal with things like supply chain and reorienting our economy, so never again are we confronted with shortages like this, whether it's because of a pandemic or an international crisis. If you go back to May of 2018, or sometime in, I believe it was May 2018, I tweeted it out earlier this week. I asked, go on my Twitter, @Rubio, and you'll see a speech that I gave in 2018 discussing the vulnerabilities that we faced in our supply chain when it came to China, and including biomedicines that I discussed.
But I guess that's the disturbing part, though. I think that this generic drugs or drug components to drugs is a national security issue, since it affects so many Americans. Is that, it's hard for me to understand why we can't move faster on that.
That was the point of the speech. If you watch it, if people see it at my Twitter feed, you'll see what I'm saying. And that is that when history writes about this time, they'll say that while all of this was happening, we were wasting our time arguing about other things that weren't nearly as important. So I agree 100%.
Beaches have been opening. We had in Jacksonville and other plans to open other beaches. What's your view of opening beaches in Florida now?
The issue is not the opening. The issue is what happens when there's only one place that's open, and everyone who decides to be dumb goes out and floods one place. Now, I think some of the reactions to Jacksonville were exaggerated. Some of the pictures out there were not fully accurate or didn't fully reflect what was actually happening there. You can understand, too, people have been pent up in their homes, unable to go anywhere for a long time, and you tell them it's okay to go somewhere, and they're going to go. What I do think we want to avoid are mass gatherings of people in which then you're going to see some infections that can be traced back. Well, look, I think ultimately that's a real challenge. The answer is no one really knows how we do this yet, because it's never been done before. No country on the planet, no leader alive today has ever confronted this challenge that we confront today. If we can take coronavirus and COVID-19 and turn it from a mortality or a mortal event and one that kills people, lethal one, into one that people don't have to go into ICU for, that is a big development, even before we get to a vaccine. So let's be hopeful that a lot of these therapies that are being researched out there turn out to be effective and can be implemented in a broad way, because that will really, I think, accelerate a lot of these things that we'd like to see happen.
Senator, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time for me. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. Stay safe.